The fluorescence of the office lights had become David's steady companion these past 3 years. At 52, he'd learned to find peace in the predictable. The hum of the copy machine, the tick of the wall clock, the precise way his desk calendar showed another day crossed off. What wasn't predictable was Margaret Chen. His boss had a reputation that preceded her like thunder before rain. At 58, she'd built her career on exacting standards and unwavering principles. Her silver-streaked hair was always pulled back in that same efficient twist. Her glasses sat perpetually on the bridge of her nose as she reviewed reports with the intensity of a jeweler examining diamonds for flaws. And she found flaws. Always. "David, these projections are incomplete," she'd say, her voice carrying that particular tone that made his jaw tighten. Not loud, never loud. Margaret didn't need volume. She had precision instead, and somehow that was worse. He'd gather the papers, nod quietly, and return to his desk. His daughter Emma, 17 now and wiser than her years, had asked him once why he didn't just find another job. "Because, sweetheart," he'd told her, "stability matters more than comfort sometimes." Emma had given him that look, the one that said she understood more than he wanted her to. She'd grown up too fast after her mother left, had shouldered responsibilities no teenager should carry, but she never complained, and neither would he. Still, working with Margaret tested every ounce of patience he'd cultivated over the years. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in late October. The quarterly reports were due, and David had spent the weekend, time he should have spent with Emma, perfecting every detail. The numbers were solid. The analysis was thorough. He'd checked it 3 times. Margaret called him into her office at 4 o'clock, when the autumn light slanted through the windows in that particular way that reminded him of every difficult conversation he'd ever had. "Sit down, please." She didn't look up from his report, her pen moving in small, precise marks. He sat, watching her face for some sign of approval. There was none. "The methodology here," she tapped the page, "is fundamentally flawed. You've made assumptions that aren't supported by the data from the previous quarter." David felt something crack inside him, not loudly, but definitely, like ice under weight. "With respect, Margaret, those assumptions are based on the guidance you gave me 2 weeks ago." She looked up then, her brown eyes sharp behind her glasses. "I gave you a framework, not a mandate to ignore contradictory evidence. I didn't ignore anything." His voice remained calm, but barely. "I followed your instructions exactly. My instructions were to think critically, not to follow blindly." He stood up, surprising himself. "That's not fair. You can't tell me to do one thing and then criticize me for doing it." She stood too, setting down her pen with deliberate care. "I can when the outcome is mediocre work." "Mediocre?" The word stung more than it should have. "I gave up my entire weekend for this. My daughter ate dinner alone both nights because I was here trying to make it perfect for you. I didn't ask you to sacrifice your personal life. You didn't have to ask. The expectation is always there, Margaret, the impossible standard that nothing is ever quite good enough." They were standing close now, closer than was comfortable in an office setting. Her jaw was set in that stubborn line he'd come to recognize. But something else flickered in her expression. Something that looked almost like pain. "You think I don't know what sacrifice looks like?" Her voice had dropped, lost some of its edge. "You think I haven't given up things for this company? I think you measure everyone against a standard that maybe only you can meet. And I think you're afraid to push yourself beyond safe and adequate." The words hung between them, sharp and true and hurtful in equal measure. David felt his face flush with anger and something else, frustration that had been building for months, maybe years. "You don't know anything about me," he said quietly. "You don't know what it's like to raise a daughter alone, to make dinner every night and help with homework and try to be both parents at once. You don't know what it's like to be terrified that one mistake, one moment of not being good enough, could cost you everything." Margaret's expression shifted, the armor cracking just slightly. "You're right. I don't know that. Then maybe stop judging me for not being—" She kissed him. It happened so suddenly that David's mind went blank. One moment they were arguing, the next her hands were on his shoulders and her lips were on his and the whole world had tilted sideways. When she pulled back, her eyes were wide with shock, at herself, at what she'd done. I'm sorry. That was completely inappropriate. She stepped back, her hand going to her forehead in a gesture of pure mortification. I don't know what... Margaret. His heart was hammering, but his voice came out steady. Gentle, even. Why did you do that? She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time since he'd known her, Margaret Chen looked lost. Because I've been wanting to for 6 months, she whispered. And because you're right, about all of it. The silence that followed was different from the one that had filled the space between them before. This one was full of possibility, of things unspoken finally demanding to be acknowledged. David let out a long breath. You have a really terrible way of showing interest in someone. A small, unexpected smile touched her lips. I'm aware. He should have been angry. Should have reported this to HR, demanded a transfer, done any number of appropriate professional things. Instead, he pulled out the chair he'd been sitting in and gestured for her to sit. Talk to me. Not as my boss, just talk to me. Margaret sat slowly, as if the chair might disappear beneath her. When she spoke, her voice had lost all its professional armor. I was married once, 23 years. He was a good man, kind, patient, everything I wasn't. She looked down at her hands. He left 6 years ago, said he felt like he was living with a statue, not a wife. Said I'd forgotten how to be human. David settled into the chair across from her, waiting. I threw myself into work after that. It was what I knew, what I was good at. And I told myself that excellence was enough, that achievement mattered more than connection. She looked up at him. Then you started working here, and you were so present, so genuine. You'd talk about your daughter with this light in your eyes, and I realized I'd never talked about anything that way, never let myself care about anything that much. So you pushed me harder, David said, understanding dawning. I pushed you because I saw potential you weren't using, but also because... She paused, vulnerability naked on her face. Because watching you be a good father, a good person, reminded me of everything I'd let slip away. And that made me angry. David reached across the small space between them and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. You're not a statue, Margaret. I've done a good impression of one. Maybe, he smiled. But statues don't kiss their employees in the middle of arguments. She laughed, and it was startling. Warm and real and nothing like the woman he thought he knew. They talked until the cleaning crew arrived, surprising them both. They talked about Emma and Margaret's ex-husband and the careers they'd built like fortresses around their hearts. They talked about loneliness and fear and the way perfectionism could become a prison. I don't expect this to change anything, Margaret said as they finally stood to leave. At work, I mean. I still need you to do better on those reports. I know, David smiled. But maybe we could discuss it over dinner sometime? As two people, not boss and employee, that would be highly irregular. I think we're past regular at this point. She considered this, then nodded. Friday? Friday. That night when David got home, Emma was curled up on the couch with her calculus homework spread across the coffee table. You're late, she said without looking up. Again, I know, I'm sorry, sweetheart. She set down her pencil and really looked at him. You're smiling, though, am I? Yeah, it's weird. What happened? David sat down beside her, moving a textbook to make room, something unexpected, something I didn't know I needed. Emma studied his face with that too-old wisdom in her eyes. Does it have to do with your impossible boss? She's not impossible. She's just complicated. Complicated like worth being late? Complicated. He thought about Margaret's hand in his, about the vulnerability in her eyes when she'd admitted to being lonely, about the way she'd laughed, really laughed, when he'd made a terrible joke about quarterly projections. Yeah, that kind of complicated. Emma smiled and went back to her homework. Good. You deserve that kind of complicated, Dad. The following Friday, David made reservations at a quiet Italian place downtown. He told Emma he had a dinner meeting, which was technically true, though her knowing smirk suggested she saw right through him. Margaret arrived exactly on time, wearing a soft blue sweater instead of her usual blazer. Her hair was down, falling in silver-streaked waves around her shoulders. She looked nervous. I almost canceled 3 times, she admitted as they sat down. What stopped you? The thought of Monday morning, knowing I'd been too afraid to try. They ordered wine and pasta and talked about everything except work. Margaret told him about growing up in San Francisco, about her parents' restaurant and how she'd vowed never to work in food service. David talked about his marriage, about the slow dissolving of something he'd thought was solid, about learning to braid Emma's hair from YouTube videos. You're a good father, Margaret said quietly. I hope you know that. I'm trying to be. No, you are. I can see it in everything you do. The way you talk about her, the way you prioritize her even when it costs you. She paused. I pushed you so hard because I saw you holding back, but now I understand you weren't holding back. You were making room for what mattered. David reached across the table, taking her hand. You matter too, Margaret. Your standards, your principles, they come from somewhere good. You just forgot to be gentle with yourself. Her eyes glistened. I don't know if I remember how. Then we'll figure it out together. Slowly. No impossible standards, no perfect projections, just us being human. She squeezed his hand. That sounds terrifying. Terrifying in a good way, in the best way. They took it slowly after that. Dinners became a weekly ritual, then twice weekly. Margaret started leaving the office at 6 instead of 8, joining David and Emma for casual dinners, where she learned that 17-year-olds could be surprisingly insightful about adult relationships. At work, Margaret remained exacting but added something new: recognition when David did well and, more importantly, patience when he struggled. David pushed himself harder, not from fear but from wanting to meet her halfway. 3 months later, on a snowy January evening, Margaret sat at David's kitchen table helping Emma with a college essay while he made his famous, according to Emma, mediocre lasagna. This sentence is too passive, Margaret said, her pen hovering over Emma's laptop. Isn't that what colleges want? Emma asked. Colleges want authenticity. Be bold. Own your voice. David watched them from the stove, his heart full in a way he'd forgotten was possible. Margaret caught his eye and smiled, that real smile he'd worked so hard to earn. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, they sat on the couch with tea, Margaret's head resting on David's shoulder. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not giving up on me, for seeing past the impossible boss. You were never impossible. Just scared. We were both scared. He kissed the top of her head. Maybe that's the thing about getting older. You realize that scared is okay, that perfect doesn't exist, that sometimes the best things come from arguments in offices and completely inappropriate kisses. Margaret laughed, tilting her face up to his. Are you saying my lack of professionalism was actually a good thing? I'm saying sometimes the heart knows things the head hasn't figured out yet. She kissed him then, soft and unhurried. And David thought about all the lonely nights he'd spent wondering if this was all life had left to offer, about how wrong he'd been, about how kindness and connection could bloom in the unlikeliest soil. When they pulled apart, Margaret's eyes were bright. I love you, she said. I don't say it enough, don't say anything enough, but I do. I know, David said. I love you too. Outside, snow fell softly over the quiet street, covering everything in gentle white. Inside, 2 people who'd spent years building walls found warmth in tearing them down, one careful brick at a time. And upstairs, a 17-year-old girl smiled in her sleep, glad that her father had finally found someone who made him smile like that, like life was still full of beautiful surprises.